animals communicate to each other in their own unique way. But it is only humans, so the scientists have held, who have such a rich and sophisticated system called language. Only we have the ability to convey complex thoughts, understand syntax and grammar, and that's a skill we are born with. It's built into the design of the human brain. But now researchers working with some of the great apes claim their animals have developed the language comprehension and communication skills equivalent to those of a young child.
Kanzi, give Sue bananas. Kanzi, give Sue pears.
Is what we are seeing mere clever mimicry, or does it force us to rethink our belief that language is proof of superior and uniquely human intelligence?
Put some water in the pan for our noodles. More water, more water. Get your onions right here and put them in your bowl.
The first witness in this section is biologist Professor Sue Savage-Rumbaugh, who studies language development in chimpanzees.
Professor Savage-Rumbaugh, you are, I think, professor at the Department of Biology and Psychology at the Georgia State University.
Yes, sir.
And you've been studying the emergence of language and cognition in the human and ape minds for some years now.
Yes, I have, since 1972.
You're the author of a book called Kanzi, The Ape at the Brink of the Human Mind. Tell us about Kanzi.
Well, Kanzi was an accident. At the time we started raising Kanzi, I was still of a mind that you had to teach language to an ape. And Kanzi is a member of a special sort of ape, which is called pygmy chimpanzee or bonobo. And no one had done research with that ape before, and I wanted to try. I worked for 2.5 years with his mother with very little effect. At one point then, we decided to briefly separate Kanzi from his mother so that she could breed with a male. And as soon as this was done, we realized that Kanzi had learned all the symbols we had been attempting to teach his mother and could use them in a variety of ways to make statements, to make comments. He could combine them, and this was quite a surprise to us.
Now, can you tell our jury, Professor Savage-Rumbaugh, just how large his vocabulary is?
His comprehension vocabulary is thousands of words. It's too large for us to easily measure, but his productive vocabulary is about 100 to 150 words.
And why the difference?
Because Kanzi doesn't have the same kind of throat we do, and the language Kanzi's learning is spoken English, but he can't speak English. He has to point to a symbol on a board, so he has to pair a word that he knows in his mind with a printed symbol on the board. So it's as though a child who was learning English had to point to printed words in order to be able to speak. So there's a great discrepancy between his input and output system.
What importance do you attach to watching your chimpanzees learning a language?
The fact that they did that in our lab, when I didn't anticipate that they could do it, when I didn't know that they were going to do it, when it was not a preconceived hypothesis on my part, suggests that they're probably doing that in the wild, and because they're doing that in the wild, they need liberty, life, and the pursuit of happiness.
Professor Savage-Rumbaugh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a huge leap, though, isn't it, to presume that there is a form of language in the wild, because in the entirely non-wild surroundings of your laboratory, under considerable stimulation from you and your team, you've managed to obtain some data that permits you to suggest that there is some form of language that goes beyond the mere ability to communicate that most animals have.
Oh, I don't think it's a huge leap at all. And in fact, it's a small leap, but one I didn't make until I actually went to the wild and watched what these apes were doing in the wild. But the leap is very small. In fact, the problem is that we've been so anthropocentric that we've gone out into the wild and we've said, where is human language? Where is your language? It's exactly like ours. What is your name for this and your name for that? And if an ape doesn't point at something and tell you the name for it, you conclude automatically that it has no language. What we don't do is look at how language really functions in human beings. It's a social, coordinating, organizing vector. And there's certainly, everyone who's watched apes in the wild says there's a tremendous amount of social coordination that's going on. And we haven't looked in that arena for language. We've not dared to look for language. We want not to find it there. That's the problem.
But do you think that, for instance, what you call language really develops beyond basic elements of food and play? There's plenty of examples in the literature of animals that no one suggests should be accorded human rights, who are capable of behavior that can be described as communication, but which is really a response to certain circumstances, to the stimuli of wanting food, wanting various other things that relate to their daily lives.
Oh, there are many other symbols that the chimps use. Two prominent ones are good and bad. They will tell you when they're going to be good and when they're going to be bad, and it's pretty reliable. Another thing that happens is the word quiet. When I am in too much of a disciplinary mood toward Kanzi or Pamanitia, they will go to the keyboard and ask me to be quiet. That has very little to do with food.
Aren't you falling into the trap that was identified by Dr. Hayes here? And I understand why, given the intimate relationship that plainly goes on between you and your animals, of imputing to them motivations merely from an observation of activity.
No, I'm not imputing to them motivations at all. Kanzi weighs 180 pounds, and it's very dangerous to just impute my own will onto Kanzi.
Well,
I have to
it's
deal with
reassuring
him
if he weighs 180 pounds, he's called a pygmy. I feel better about myself.
I have to deal with him as an independent entity. In fact, just the day before coming to this trial, I had Kanzi out in the woods, and he's large enough now that I typically put a lead on him, which I hate to do, but I need to do that. And he became very...
You need to do that because he can behave badly.
Because he could go outside the perimeter fence and somebody might shoot him and it wouldn't be called murder.
But the point nevertheless remains that in trying to impute from these observations and these behaviors a quasi-human status, we cannot ignore the fact that man, often for evil purposes, has become master of his environment in a way that those chimpanzees haven't.
Well, certainly they have mastered their environment in Zaire. They live in the forest there. They eat the same foods that the local people eat. They have a similar lifestyle from day to day, and they're very happy and very healthy in the wild.
Are you really suggesting, though, that that is an intelligence that can be allied to human intelligence, as against a superior form of animal intelligence that plainly should be respected and protected?
I'm sorry, I can't see any difference between the form of intelligence they exhibit and a clear demarcation between human intelligence. I can't possibly think what that would be.
Taking issue with Professor Savage-Rumbaugh is language specialist Steven Pinker, Professor of Brain and Cognitive Science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
Welcome, Professor Pinker. I think
Thank you.
You have had the opportunity of studying the literature and participating indeed in the debate that goes on about animals and language. And you've also had the opportunity of hearing Professor Savage-Rumbaugh. Did what she said impress you, that the animals that she works with possess language?
Well, I'm impressed that the pygmy chimpanzees can communicate and they can respond to humans. But I think that what they're doing is very different from what you and I are doing right now. All human societies, all people within a society can convey who did what to whom using complex grammar and syntax. And we come by this skill not by having some other species decide that they would like to see how we communicate, but we just pick it up naturally as children. Children don't need any kind of training. They don't need any conscious decision for someone to teach them language. It very often happens in the animal kingdom that particular species develop their own very sophisticated and very specialized forms of communication. Language just happens to be ours.
And it doesn't happen to be the great apes.
No, I think that the great apes, like other species, can be taught to respond to a few simple words and to the order. If you say, put the banana on the plate, banana comes before plate. They can understand banana, they can understand plate, and they can grasp that since banana is mentioned first, you should pick up the banana and put it on the plate rather than vice versa.
Professor Pinker, it's being suggested in this debate that the possession of language should be a key, an entry pass into possession of human rights, or certainly some human rights. Do you think language should be used in that way?
No, I don't. It's rather ironic that the supposed definition of biological worth for other species is said to be the peculiarly human way of communicating. I think animal species have developed many magnificent adaptations, including communication, and I don't see that the measure of worth should be whether some other species communicates the way we do.
Thank you very much.
Professor Pinker, you heard, I hope, Sue Savage-Rumbaugh giving her evidence a minute or two ago.
Yes, I did.
The point that I think was of particular interest to us, and I'd like to put to you, is that she discovered that without training, one and indeed more of her apes began to learn some human language. Did you hear that?
Yes, it's a bit of an exaggeration because Kanzi, which is the only case that I've read about in the literature, was by his mother's side as she was being trained for quite some time. So the training wasn't directed at Kanzi, but Kanzi was right there at the time as there was training going on. So I think it shows that that species, like many species, can pick up some coarse properties of the sounds of English words or words in any language and pair them with particular objects.
But if an ape does not have the physiology to utter the sounds, there's an important limiting factor in the ability of the ape to communicate back in the language. Surely the right test is to look at the ability of the ape to comprehend complex grammar.
I think it's quite different. It's really the essence of the design of language that it's a bidirectional communication system, and the fact that you've got to use comprehension as the cornerstone of your argument about ape communication shows that they have not evolved the system that we have.
I just wonder whether your approach is limited by the area of research that you yourself have been involved in. You're a reader of the research into animals' linguistic capabilities, but yourself, you've never been involved in it. Is that right?
I've never been involved in teaching language to other primates, no.
Or watching them learn it?
I have read the scientific literature, and the argument had better be able to stand on what's reported in the scientific literature. If the argument is you have to be there, then it's certainly outside the range of science.
Professor Pinker, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Service of